those simple questions that might be hard to answer. So if I say so in programming, what is a name? I suppose I could turn the lights back on now so you can see what I'm doing.
There's better definitions, but I'm thinking like a string that represents it, or it symbolizes something.
Okay, yeah, that was pretty much what I was thinking as well. I just I think I would have substituted the word string with an identifier. But you know, either way is fine. It's I mean, you're tempted to say it's something that's named. You know, that's sort of a weird definition. So it's an identifier or a string associated with what did you say? Did you say anything about what it was associated with? It's always fun when using the word stuff, you know.
I conveniently left that detail out.
Okay, fine. And of course you could say with things that can be named, and then you're back to a circular reference again. But
we could go with classes, fields.
We could do that. We could make a list of the stuff that we can name. Classes, fields, methods,
parameters in general.
Parameters, local variables. Anything else? Well, from an Espresso point of view, no. So we're good here with Espresso. Could we maybe, in other languages, just add a few more? I mean, in Java, for example, we have packages, right?
Yeah, like then there's also just the file management stuff in general, like files.
There are file names, yeah. And some other stuff, right?
Yeah, modules.
Yeah, well, those are packages in Java. They're called modules in other languages, and so on and so forth. But I think that gives a pretty good idea of what a name is. So it's an association of an ID, which is typically a string of characters and numbers, to something that we can then later on refer to by that name. Okay, I'm okay with that. So what is the scope? And it's not one of those.
It's called a range in which something is
when the name's recognized.
It's recognized or active.
Okay. Maybe could we refine the part where you say range? Because what does a range mean with respect to programming? I understand a range when you talk about a set of numbers, for example. But what's a range?
Within a block.
Okay. So if you were to use the word block to describe the scope and the word name, how would it come out? What should I write down? I mean, you use it every time you program, right? But it might be a little hard to give a precise definition of.
Would it be like the memory range, like the range in memory?
I don't like using the word range because that says something with timeline, with number lines or address lines, space, and
would it be like all the names that are visible within the current block?
I mean, the modifiers, like if it's public, it's only this.
Well, the modifiers affect the scope, no doubt about that.
Oh.
We need to figure out if I say, well, first of all, what am I talking about when I talk about scope? So if I say
class scope, group of names active within a block,
something like that. So if I say the scope of A is, what do I mean by that? I guess that answers sort of the question of what is the scope. Where A is a name of something, right? I don't know if it's a class, if it's a field, if it's a method, parameter, local. But it doesn't really matter for this example.
Where it's accessible?
Yes, yeah. So, okay, now of course I could ask you, what do you mean by accessible?
Can be used.
Huh?
Can be.
Can be used?
Can
Yeah,
it be
yeah,
used?
well.
Can it be?
So,
What has a value?
what does it mean? No, absolutely not. What does it mean that it can be used and it's accessible, as opposed to not being accessible and not be used with respect to what the compiler will do?
It's declared for that area.
Yeah. So we're talking about the part of the program where it's valid to reference that name, right? So the scope of A is the part of the program where a reference to A is valid. And when I say valid, I mean the compiler is not going to come out and say A not declared. So, i.e., the compiler does not say A not declared. Okay. What's the scope of a class in Espresso? I.e., if I have a large Espresso program and I have a class, let's call it A, where in that large program can I refer to A?
I'd want more details about what to say.
About with it between the braces, what?
So it could be within the class.
The whole what?
The whole package?
Everywhere, right? Because we don't have packages in Espresso. So, because when we get to the package thing, all of a sudden the modifiers on the classes become complicated, and I thought, oh, let's not get into that. So you're right, everywhere, right? Because in Espresso, we don't have a package hierarchy. You can refer to any class that is defined anywhere in your program. Okay. Let's see, what should we do next? Fields?
Within the class, unless they're static. Or unless they're declared public, which they should.
Okay, so you say
The public, then anywhere.
within their class?
Yeah. If it's abstract, then there can be access of whoever.
If it's what?
The class is abstract. Yeah, well, dependent. If the class is abstract, then it will be passed down to the.
Right. So within their class or
the extending class.
subclasses.
Yeah, subclasses.
So can a private field be referenced in a subclass?
No.
Yeah. See, if the subclass actually has access to its private members
Isn't
or
it protected
protected.
that's visible and private is not?
That's it.
No,
That's it.
private no. If it's protected, then yes.
We don't have protected here.
Okay.
So we only have private and public. Either you get it or
You don't.
you don't.
Right.
So
Right.
You don't.
I mean,
Unless it's
if we're not sure, we could quickly write a little program to test it out.
I remember that. 'Cause
So
I
then
got
now
confused
you've
in
got to
here.
specify which modifiers are we talking about. Are we
Can't you
talking
make
about the
that,
exception?
No, I agree with you.
Specify it and then access that method outside the, so that gives
I
you
think
access.
protected and public is the same type of same.
So public class A,
Private you can't access it.
uh,
Your subclass.
private in
Easy to
field,
use referencing a method.
public class
Method.
B
So protected but you
extends
can't.
A, public
Protected or public.
void
But yeah, I think
true,
source something in that protected or public.
field equals 100, which you can clearly see there.
Yep.
Proceed, just like Java. Well, you can see it in 3 seconds.
There you go.
Should I show you the program? Yes. So here's class A that has a private field. Class B extends A and it has a method that sets field to 100, and the compiler says field was declared private and cannot be accessed outside this class. Okay. Fair enough. So here we should say within their class or subclasses, if declared public or anywhere
If they're public.
if public and static.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that gets a
Or-
little complicated, but not too bad. So this is really the most important part of it. What about methods?
Same. Is that private?
Same, right? Uh,
Anywhere or both? You're talking about both conditions, right?
yes. Oh yeah. And of course, we're going to get some issues with, if a method is public, you can't call it if it's a non-static method in a static context. But that's more fiddling. It's not really sort of real scope. The real scope business comes now with the next two. So what's the scope of a parameter and a local? Let's do parameter first.
Parameter has no public or private, so it's only in that
Right?
function.
Yep. So you want to say the body of the method. What about a local?
Same thing. It's within the body, basically within the brackets that's in, and below specifically. Below it.
And anywhere that it's passed.
But yeah, in particular, from its definition to the end of the enclosing block. Because you certainly can't do things like something curly bracket a equals 7 int a blah blah blah. Right? No. And you can't reference a on the right hand side of the initializer either. So it's below from the end of the definition or the declaration to the end of the enclosing block. Because out here, a cannot be referenced either, right? So we should say from its declaration to the end of their enclosing block. I almost felt like writing scope there, because of course there is some sort of relationship between a scope and the blocks, right? Now if I
Because it's accessing A before it's been declared.
let me just pull it up here real quick. Are you out? Of course. Okay, so where we got that part down. Okay, so actually let me pull this one down anyways. Because I just want to write another program. And I just want to see what you think about that. See if I can finish before it comes on. I can't.
Perhaps turn those lights off.
Right.
There we go.
those are some meaningful identifiers.
No, yeah, I'm not disagreeing with that. Let me see if I'm getting this right. Let's see if it works.
Oh, let me see.
Oh.
Oh, constructor for.
Yeah, so. No method foo int found. Where do I need that?
Oh, you call it before it's even been, well, shouldn't matter, I guess.
Oh, I did that here.
Yeah. I had to move that over.
No, that's fine. We'll just make
Right.
foo int a return this dot foo. So we should say return foo there, and yay, it worked. What do you think?
It sounds like what's that storybook, The Green Eggs and Ham?
So what's wrong with this program?
Poor use of naming.
Poor use of naming. Well, that was sort of the point, right? Now, from looking at this, then you can say something about what the rules are for name clashes and whatnot. I mean, what happens if I do this? Is that going to be legal? No, of course not. Because then it'll come and say, yeah, foo's already defined, so bugger off. So you can't define the same name twice in the same scope. Okay, so apparently it's okay to have a parameter and a local named the same. That's not a problem. What if I do this?
Gonna make it, does it automatically make it static
Nope.
inside the class?
Nope.
Nothing
I just put a block in.
I don't think it should do anything different.
Well,
Huh?
I don't think it should do anything different.
yeah.
It liked it. That was perfectly fine, right?
The block didn't.
Well, yeah, it's the same thing. The block will be known.
Because I created the block, and the block allows me to
Create a new declaration.
use the same name again, right? Let me ask you, that foo here, which foo is this?
That food right there.
This one?
Should. Oh
No.
no. Oh, sorry, no. The
It's
one
that
above.
one.
Should be the one above.
Right? So, apart from the fact that you should never write code like this, I agree with you, and never show this to a first year, ever, then apparently I can have classes, methods, fields, locals, parameters, fields, locals several times, all named the same. So apparently they don't live in the same scope, in the same table.
Certainly give priorities over others.
Well, that too. So what happens when I redeclare a name that was visible? Well, then all of a sudden I get a higher priority, right? If I just say foo inside here, then obviously it's that foo. If I ripped out this foo, which foo would this be? That one. If I rip that one out, which one would this be? If I rip that one out up there, which one would this be then? The field. Okay. So you see how it works, right? I just wish I could figure out how to. I think we figured this out before. How do I get the screen up?
Oh, we're there.
A
Oh,
little
we're
bit.
there.
I just
Oh,
can't
that's
tell
what I
which
meant to
one's
do.
which and what's the deal and what's that which one's the
So it seems. Maybe move this white stuff up here a moment. it seems it works exactly like we would expect it to be. So the declaration that we get when we refer to something by name is the closest one, right? That makes sense sort of here as well. Now if I do this and I draw a line here, then I have two distinct groups. And what's the difference between the parameters and the locals and these other things here? Well, there's one difference, which is that these cannot be referenced before they've been declared. But fields and classes and methods can. So it's perfectly okay to write code that looks like void f calls g, and void g calls f, right? So, same thing with classes. I can refer to classes that are declared further down in the file, and I can refer to fields that are declared later in the file as well. So there's really not much of a hierarchy when it comes to that. So these may all be, it's okay to forward reference. Did any of you ever program in Turbo Pascal? Or, well, what happens in C? Then you expected to put these prototypes in at the top, right? In Turbo Pascal, you have to say forward and then go and declare somewhere else. These cannot be referenced forward. So it's not okay. Forward reference. So I'm just going to pull this thing down again so I can actually scribble on the board. How about we do this? So what's the I don't know this. What's the scope of this thing here?
The body, from there down to the.
Well, technically from here, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't reference it there, right? So it's from here
On down to the end bracket of its current level.
So here,
Yeah.
right? So that's the scope in between. Now, what I would like to do is I'd like to create some tables, some simple tables that contain these things for me. So I want some tables that look somewhat like this. Name value. And in the name column, of course, goes the name of whatever. And I have to be careful because when I say object here, I don't mean object as an object-oriented object, but I mean one of these things, right? So I want the name of something in here. So for example, if I put in the name foo, I mean that could be anything, right? I want that to point to, in this situation, a class declaration. So that's this guy here, right? Now, would it be possible to throw in all the fields and methods into this same table? No, of course not, because I already have one thing called foo in there, and I'm allowed to have classes and fields and methods that are called the same thing. So obviously they need to live in different places, or else this is just a hash table, right? So things would just go bad. Now, if I just make this one, let me just make this one just a little bit bigger. Now, for every class declar I have, if you were to open the file classdeclar.java, you'll see it in there. I have two other tables. Name value. Name value. And this one here is for fields. And this one here is for methods. And of course, this guy here is a class table. So you can envision going through all the classes. I mean, you traverse the parse tree, and every time you see a node of type class decal, you put something into that class table there, right? So simply go through the parse tree, find all the class decals, and associate them in this table here with the name, that name, and that class declaration you built in this phase, right? And maybe we should say that this thing here is global. So that makes sense, because if I can see classes from anywhere, then the table that holds reference to it definitely need to be global. And it also fits nicely with me putting the field table and the method table inside the class decal, because you already said here that it's within the classes or subclasses or maybe something. So these are associated with the class decal. And of course I get some foo stuff in here as well. And what I get here is the field decal, and what I get here is a method decal. Now what goes into the field table, of course, would be only fields. What goes into the method table would be methods and constructors. And they go in with the name in it, in sort of these angular brackets. And static initializers, they go in with the word CL in it, or class initializer. That's just a technicality. And actually, if I were to tell you the truth, which I suppose I might as well, that really doesn't point to a class decal, because we have overloading of methods in Espresso. So what this points to is another table where these entries here are method decals. And what goes here is the signature. And what do I mean by the signature? I mean, what does the parameter list look like? So for example, if I have int f, int a, double b, then the appropriate signature is I, d. I for integer and d for double. If I have, actually, if I wanted to be completely pedantic about it, it's the parameters in brackets with the return type. We don't need to be, I don't think we need to be that, I'll be that pedantic about it, I can't remember. No, we just use this part here. So if I have void G string F, we stick to Java conventions, so the string signature looks like L, Java, lang, string, semicolon. But all that can be computed automatically for you, so you don't have to worry about it. You just have to call the right thing. So in here I might have I, D, I, and so on. So that basically gives us the setup of how we want to store information about fields, methods, and classes. And you can imagine traversing the tree